The sound of footsteps and laughter echoed along the dusty roads leading to Jerusalem. Entire families, from the youngest children to the elderly, were making their way to the holy city to celebrate Passover, one of the most important festivals in the Jewish calendar. Among the pilgrims was a special family: Mary, Joseph, and their 12-year-old son, Jesus. For them, this was no ordinary journey. It was a tradition that reflected their faith and commitment to God. Jesus, like any child his age, observed everything around him with insatiable curiosity. But there was something about him that set him apart from the others. Despite his young age, his questions revealed a depth that puzzled even the adults. In every conversation, he demonstrated a wisdom that seemed to come from another world. Mary and Joseph had always known that Jesus was special, but they also understood that he was still a child, one who required care and attention, especially on such a crowded journey. The city of Jerusalem, vibrant and full of life, welcomed them with its usual bustle. The temple, majestic on the horizon, drew crowds of faithful people who had come to honor God. Mary and Joseph, as they did every year, joined the ceremonies, fulfilling the rituals and prayers that marked this solemn occasion. Jesus, for his part, watched everything intently, captivated by the temple's grandeur and the teachings shared within its walls. During the days of celebration, Jesus seemed more thoughtful than usual. While he played with other children his age and followed his parents' instructions, there were moments when he seemed lost in his own thoughts. Mary watched him with a mix of pride and curiosity, wondering what might be going through her son's mind. It was clear that Jesus had a deep love for everything the temple and the scriptures represented. The atmosphere in Jerusalem was a blend of devotion and celebration. Songs and prayers filled the streets as pilgrims shared food and stories about their journeys. Yet Mary and Joseph couldn't shake a slight sense of unease. Jesus was at that age when children begin to explore beyond what is directly in front of them. Though they trusted him, they also knew that Jerusalem was an immense place, full of distractions and dangers. When the day came to leave, Mary and Joseph began preparing their belongings for the return trip. As was customary, the caravans were organized into large groups for greater safety. Men and women traveled separately, and the children were free to move between the two groups. Mary assumed that Jesus was with Joseph, while Joseph thought Jesus was with Mary. Confusion was common in such circumstances, and neither of them was alarmed at first. As the caravan advanced along the roads to Nazareth, Mary and Joseph began to notice something unusual. Although they asked several acquaintances, no one seemed to have seen Jesus along the way. Their initial calm began to give way to a growing sense of concern. However, they decided to wait until the end of the day to confirm that everything was fine. After all, Jesus had always been an obedient child. But as the sun began to set and the pilgrims stopped to rest, concern turned into anguish. Mary and Joseph searched among the groups of travelers, calling his name and asking if anyone had seen him. The answer was always the same: Jesus was not with them. It was at that moment they realized their son had not left Jerusalem with the caravan. Mary's heart filled with fear as Joseph tried to stay calm and find a quick solution. They decided to return to Jerusalem immediately, leaving the caravan behind. They didn't know exactly where to look, but one thing was certain: they wouldn't stop until they found their son. What they didn't realize was that their return would lead them to one of the most significant moments of their lives. The fresh morning air filled the atmosphere as the caravans prepared to leave Jerusalem. It was a typical morning after Passover. Families packed their belongings, children ran along the dusty roads, and pilgrims exchanged blessings before embarking on their journey back home. Mary and Joseph, like many others, were ready to resume their journey to Nazareth, their hearts filled with the satisfaction of having honored the traditions of their faith. At that time, caravans traveled in organized groups, separating men and women for greater safety. Children often roamed freely between the two groups, enjoying the freedom the journey afforded. Mary assumed that 12-year-old Jesus would be walking with Joseph, while Joseph thought he was with Mary or playing with other young family members. In their minds, there was no reason to worry. Jesus had always been an obedient and responsible child. As the caravan wound its way along the paths connecting Jerusalem to Nazareth, The usual bustle accompanied the travelers. The voices of children blended with the laughter and conversations of the adults. However, as the sun began to set and the travelers looked for a place to rest, an unsettling emptiness began to creep into Mary and Joseph's hearts. Among the crowd, there was no sign of Jesus. First, their concern was mild. Perhaps Jesus was farther ahead with other children or had found a spot among the men. Yet, as they asked around, the responses became repetitive. No one had seen him since leaving Jerusalem. Their calm gave way to uncertainty, and that quickly turned into alarm. Mary, her heart racing, searched every corner of the caravan, calling her son's name. Joseph, trying to stay composed, asked every group of men if they had seen him. As night fell, the reality became undeniable. Jesus was not with them. He had been left behind, lost in the vastness of Jerusalem. Mary's mind was flooded with anguished questions. How could this have happened? Where could he be? Was he safe? Meanwhile, Joseph tried to reassure her, though the weight of responsibility weighed heavily on him. The thought of their son alone in such a large, bustling city was almost unbearable. Their decision was immediate. They would return to Jerusalem. Leaving the caravan behind, they explained their situation to the other pilgrims and set off back to the city. It was a hurried march, laden with anxiety and fear. In the silence of the night, their thoughts were consumed by images of Jesus. His smile, his words, his curiosity about the temple. What could have caused him to stay behind? Despite their distress, a small spark of hope remained. They knew Jesus. They knew he was a special child with a unique connection to God. Perhaps that very connection was keeping him safe as they rushed to find him. Jerusalem was an immense place, filled with labyrinthine streets and an ever-changing crowd. As they approached the city, the sounds of the bustling night seemed to heighten their urgency. Mary and Joseph had no clear idea where to begin their search, but one thing was certain: they would not rest until they found their son. With every step, their determination grew. The love of parents for their child, combined with their faith in God, was stronger than any fear. What they didn't know was that this moment of desperation was about to transform into a life-changing encounter, one that would leave an indelible mark on their lives forever. The journey back to Jerusalem was filled with anxiety and silent prayers. The city, which just days before had been the vibrant backdrop of the Passover celebration, now felt like an immense and intimidating labyrinth to Mary and Joseph. The thought of Jesus, their beloved son, lost amidst so many people weighed heavily on their hearts. Yet they refused to stop. Every step toward the city was a mix of desperation and hope. As they crossed the gates of Jerusalem, the noise of the marketplace and the chatter of passers-by seemed to amplify their distress. Despite the exhaustion from the journey back, they wasted no time beginning their search. Their feet carried them to the busiest places: the main market, the narrow streets lined with shops, and, of course, the inns where pilgrims often stayed. Every person they asked gave them the same answer: they had not seen a boy matching Jesus' description. As the hours passed, frustration began to blend with sadness. Mary couldn't help but imagine Jesus alone, perhaps frightened, perhaps trying to find his way back to them. Guilt struck her deeply. How had this happened? How had they lost sight of their son? Joseph, though trying to remain strong, battled his own remorse. But both knew that stopping or wallowing in regret was not an option. Jesus needed them. The first day ended with no trace of their son. Exhausted, they allowed themselves a brief rest before resuming their search at dawn. The streets of Jerusalem seemed endless, and every corner presented new possibilities and unanswered questions. As they inquired with merchants, travelers, and locals, a pattern began to emerge. Some people remembered seeing a boy who fit Jesus' description, but they didn't know where he had gone. This gave them a sliver of hope, though it also deepened their despair. Every lead seemed to end in a dead end. The second day was even more challenging. Physical and emotional exhaustion began to take its toll, but Mary and Joseph refused to stop. They searched in the most unlikely places: dark alleys, forgotten corners of the city. They even ventured to ask the temple priests if they had seen a boy who seemed lost. Despite all their efforts, the answer remained the same. There was no sign of Jesus. The night of the second day was especially difficult for Mary. As she sat with Joseph under the starry sky, her tear-filled eyes reflected her worry. In a hushed voice, she prayed, pleading with God to protect her son, to give them a sign, any clue to help them find him. Joseph, though also deeply troubled, took her hand and reassured her, God is with him. We will find him. At dawn on the third day, something inside them urged them to return to the temple. Though they had already visited it earlier in their search, they felt compelled to try again. The temple was the heart of Jerusalem, a gathering place for many pilgrims and scholars of the scriptures. If Jesus had a place to turn to, it would surely be there. With renewed determination, they made their way to the temple. As they ascended the steps, the mixture of fear and hope in their hearts reached its peak. What if he wasn't there? What would they do next? Yet, there was something in Mary's gaze that revealed an unshakable faith. Her son was no ordinary child. He had a unique connection with God, and that filled her with an inexplicable hope. What they found as they entered the temple would mark a turning point in their search. After 3 days of anguish, tears, and prayers, they were about to come face to face with a scene that would not only calm their hearts, but also reveal a glimpse of their son's unique purpose. The search was nearing its end, but what they discovered there would forever change how they saw Jesus. The third day of searching led Mary and Joseph to the temple, the very heart of the Passover celebrations. As they passed through its gates, their hearts beat with a mixture of nervousness and hope. Could Jesus be there? And if they found him, in what state would they find him? Every step echoed through the sacred halls of the temple as they whispered silent prayers, their eyes scanning every corner. When they finally saw him, time seemed to stand still. There was Jesus seated among the teachers of the law. But what was happening was far from what they expected. Instead of appearing lost or frightened, Jesus was deeply engaged in a dialogue with Jerusalem's wisest men. His posture was calm, his gaze steady, and his tone carried both authority and humility. Mary placed her hands over her heart, feeling a wave of relief yet deeply moved by what she was witnessing. The teachers of the temple, men well-versed in the scriptures and the laws of Moses, were listening intently to young Jesus. He was not a passive listener. Jesus asked questions that challenged the learned men, and when they responded, he offered answers that left them astonished. His understanding of God's word went far beyond what anyone would expect from a boy his age. Some murmured among themselves in amazement, asking, "Who is this boy who speaks with such clarity and wisdom?" Mary and Joseph, though relieved to have found their son, were bewildered. They made their way through the crowd to reach him. Mary, her heart still racing, was the first to speak, letting her emotions flow into her words. "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." It was the cry of a mother who had spent days in anguish, mixed with the relief of finally having her child before her. Jesus looked up at them, and his response, though simple, was profoundly significant. "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" His words lingered in the air, resonating not only with Mary and Joseph, but also with everyone nearby. It was a declaration filled with deep mystery and a powerful reminder of his identity. Mary and Joseph exchanged a glance, unable to fully grasp what Jesus had just said. From the moment of his birth, they had known he was special, that he had a divine purpose. Yet, in that moment, their understanding deepened. What did he mean by "my Father's house"? How could a child speak with such certainty about his place in God's plan? For the temple teachers, Jesus' presence was an unforgettable event. They had spent years studying the scriptures, teaching others, and solving complex matters of the law. Yet the clarity and depth with which this young boy spoke challenged them in ways they could not ignore. Some even began to wonder if this child might be the fulfillment of the prophecies they had studied all their lives. As Jesus continued speaking, explaining passages and posing new ideas, Mary and Joseph waited patiently, watching their son with a mixture of awe and wonder. They realized in that moment that Jesus was not just their son. He was someone with a far greater calling, one they could not yet fully comprehend. When the conversation with the teachers finally ended, Jesus stood and joined them. His face reflected a serenity that starkly contrasted with the days of anguish his parents had endured. Mary and Joseph decided not to press him further with questions. Though they didn't fully understand what had happened, they knew they were in the presence of something far greater than they could imagine. As they left the temple, Mary's heart was filled with a mixture of emotions. Gratitude for finding Jesus safe and sound, but also deep reflection on her son's words and actions. It was clear that this moment marked not just the end of a physical search, but the beginning of a deeper understanding of who Jesus was and what his mission in this world would entail. And so, with Jesus walking between them, they left the temple, carrying not only the relief of finding him, but also a renewed certainty that God was working through their son in ways they were only beginning to glimpse. What they didn't yet know was that this event was but a glimpse of the revelations and challenges the future would hold. With their hearts finally at peace, Mary and Joseph began the journey back to Nazareth with their son. The relief of having found him in the temple was immense, but the experience had also left them deeply reflective. As they walked along the dusty road, Jesus' words still echoed in their minds. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" It was a statement they didn't fully understand at the time, yet it illuminated the divine purpose surrounding him. The return journey felt different from the one they had taken to Jerusalem. The tension that had marked the days of searching gave way to calmer conversations and a closer observation of Jesus. Although he seemed to remain the same kind and respectful child, there was something about him that revealed a wisdom and understanding far beyond his years. Jesus didn't say much about what had happened in the temple, but he didn't need to. His serenity conveyed the certainty that he had been exactly where he was meant to be, even amid his parents' confusion. As they approached Nazareth, familiar sights began to appear, bringing a sense of home. The green hills, small vineyards, and humble houses of the village were a reminder of their daily life, simple, yet deeply rooted in faith. Mary and Joseph understood that although they were returning to their normal routine, something within them had changed. The episode in Jerusalem made it clear that Jesus was not only their son but also the Son of God. This understanding brought with it an even greater sense of responsibility. In Nazareth, Jesus resumed life like any other child his age. He helped Joseph in the carpentry workshop, diligently learning the trade. He was known for his kindness and willingness to help others. Neighbors often remarked on how respectful he was toward elders and how gentle he was with younger children. Yet those closest to him, like his mother, knew there was something extraordinary about him. While he participated in the village's everyday activities, his way of observing the world and his connection with God were unique. Luke 2 verse 52 describes this period of his life with a powerful phrase. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and men. This growth was not merely physical but holistic, reflecting his divine mission. Every lesson learned in the carpentry shop, every interaction with neighbors, every moment of prayer contributed to shaping him for the purpose that awaited him. Mary, for her part, treasured every detail of Jesus' life in her heart. From the visit of the shepherds in Bethlehem to the encounter with the teachers in the temple, every moment seemed to be a piece of God's grand plan. Though she sometimes felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of raising the Messiah, she found comfort in her faith, trusting that God was guiding them on this journey. Joseph, with his quiet and steadfast character, played a vital role in Jesus' upbringing. As his earthly father, he taught him not only the practical skills needed for life, but also the values of hard work, honesty, and humility. Though the scriptures don't recount much about Joseph after this event, his influence on Jesus' life was undoubtedly profound and enduring. The years passed, and Jesus grew amid the quiet routine of Nazareth. Yet those around him had no idea that the young man who walked their streets and worked in the carpentry shop was destined to change the course of history. For Mary and Joseph, each day with Jesus was a blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary. At times, the weight of their knowledge felt heavy, but it was also filled with hope. They knew that, even though the world didn't yet understand, their son was the fulfillment of God's promises. The journey back to Nazareth not only marked the close of one chapter, but also the beginning of a crucial stage in Jesus' life. In that small village, Amid the simplicity of everyday life, the Son of God was preparing for the extraordinary mission that would transform the destiny of humanity. What began as an anxious search in Jerusalem became a lesson in faith, love, and purpose, one that would resonate through the ages.